There's been a significant rise in convictions of the perpetrators of domestic violence. The crime is now said to account for 10% of all the work done by the Crown Prosecution Service and is said to be the result of encouraging women to come forward rather than suffer in silence. But it's not so easy for women who make complaints, similar to those of historic sexual assault, about attacks they suffered in the past. A woman who listens to Woman's Hour and whom we shan't name got in touch to tell us that some categories of domestic violence are classed as common assault. There's a 6-month time limit on such cases, so when she made a complaint about repeated abuse she'd suffered in the past, she was told it was out of time. She explained to me what had happened to her.
In 1983, there was an incident and my husband put his hands around my throat and he tries to strangle me. That was the first time that he had ever been violent since I'd known him. I'd met him in 1982. I went ahead and I married him under pressure from my grandparents in 1984, and then there was complete and absolute emotional control after that. The moment that I married him, I was not allowed to go out and have dinner with a girlfriend. I was only allowed to go out and have lunch. At home, I was dominated absolutely and completely. His word was law, and I was not allowed to disagree at all. And if I did, the consequences would be dire and that there would be silences, rages.
And what physical violence did he use, which took place in front of your children?
In 1987, when my youngest child was a year old, he hit me very hard and with great deliberation and without any provocation across the left side of my face, and this resulted in his breaking my nose. I went to hospital later that evening when it wouldn't stop bleeding because I didn't realise it was broken, although my face didn't look right. When I got to hospital, it's the consultant who saw me there that told me that, in fact, I had been assaulted by my husband and that he had broken my nose. And I told the consultant, no. I walked into a door and the consultant said, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to arrest the door. But I said, no, please. And then I admitted that it had been my husband who had assaulted me, but I did not want to report him because I was absolutely petrified of what further damage he would do to me if the police came around, because in the 80s it wasn't taken as seriously as it is supposed to be in 2014. 4 years later, after he had again promised that I would never be touched and he'd never hit me again, all the ridiculous broken promises, in front of my brother, he threw me repeatedly against the iron gates of a lift, and every time I fell, I'd be picked up and thrown against them again. Meanwhile, the emotional pressure at home, it was like a pressure cooker. 1995, my brother had just been told, my 31-year-old brother, that he had been given a year to live. And I asked him, I said, please, my brother's dying. I have to nurse him. This is going to be a very, very difficult year for me. Please, could you kindly just leave the house? That's all I said. And he said, fine, I will go. But before I do, and he strode towards me and he pulled his arm as far back as he could. Now, I weigh 7 stone. My ex-husband weighs 17 stone, so I was hardly a match. This bear of a man strode towards me and he hit me with his full force across, again, the left side of my head. Now, not my face, but my head. Immediately, there was blood in my eye and my entire face swelled up, and it looked like my features had actually moved from the left-hand side of my face to the right. I was completely dazed, but my first thought was, of course, to just protect my children, because my youngest was absolutely screaming her head off. My oldest fell to the floor and had an asthma attack and just kept lying there, totally helplessly looking on, saying, please don't hit my mother, please don't hit my mother. At this point, my ex-husband left the house.
What was the long-term impact on your health of the violence that you suffered?
I'd actually sustained a brain hemorrhage. I live with permanent temporal neuralgia, and it's facial neuralgia on the left-hand side of my face, which is basically, I wake up in the morning with my head throbbing and my teeth, the left side of my nose, right down the left-hand side of my face, and I wake up with this acute pain which starts in the morning, and there's no relief from it apart from sleep all day long.
Now, it did take you a very long time to report what had happened. But why was the case never taken to court?
Well, the reason for that, Jenny, is because the police eventually failed me completely, because once they had started the case, they arrested my husband within 2 weeks. They brought him into the station. They showed him the photographs. He lied. He denied absolutely everything.
So why was the case dropped?
The case was dropped because my investigating officer sent the report to the CPS before he received my medical records. And that is actually preposterous.
But what did the CPS say? Why were they not prepared to take the case to court?
Because they did not have the evidence. Then the senior detective, once he had got my records in his hands, the next day realised he had made a catastrophic error, and he rang up the CPS himself and he asked them to overturn the decision. He said that you need to reverse the decision, because he said, I've just finally read the hospital records, and in fact 1986 alone should be charged for ABH, and the CPS refused to reverse their decision.
Now, when you first contacted us, you said you were concerned that there was a 6-month time limit
Correct.
on a lot of cases of domestic violence because they were classified as common assault and not actual bodily harm or grievous bodily harm.
Exactly.
Why is there such a short time on these kind of cases?
This is what I want to know, Jenny, and this is why I've spoken to the group WAR about this, because I feel...
Women Against Rape.
Women Against Rape, and they are backing my one-woman campaign to have the 6-month law of reportage abolished, because there is no time limit imposed on reporting rape. And in fact, for rape, there is much less written evidence from hospitals and much less eyewitness evidence. Obviously, very few people would see it, as there is in domestic violence.
But why is a 6-month time limit too short a time for any domestic violence, in your view?
Because it takes more than 6 months to even get it around your head that you have been hurt so badly, physically, by somebody who is supposed to protect you, who you trusted absolutely, and the first time that it happens especially comes as such a shock that it takes more than 6 months for just you to come out of shock, for a woman to come out of shock. Often her circumstances will prevent her from doing anything at the time. She may have small children. There are so many issues here at stake, and the sheer terror then of, if nothing is done, she has to come back because she is totally financially dependent perhaps on her abuser, and she has to come back and face him. 6 months it flies by, as you know.
So what difference would it make to you and other women you know of if the 6-month limit were lifted? Is that enough, or do we need to see any form of domestic violence as something more serious than common assault?
I feel that common assault, the term common assault itself, must not be used ever again in a domestic violence case, because if you push somebody in a pub, just push them and cause them absolutely no injury, they can report you to the police, and the police will come and arrest them, the perpetrator, and it will be called common assault. How do you compare a shattered face and call that common assault, and pushing someone in the street, a stranger, as common assault?
So now that you're working with Women Against Rape,
yes,
what are you hoping to achieve?
What I want is that I feel that there should be no time limit in which a woman should be allowed to go and say, this was done to me, and particularly women of the older generation. With my generation came this feeling of deep, deep, deep shame, where you felt that you had to just take it, be stoic, bear it, cover up your scars with makeup, carry on as though nothing was happening, and it was a question of stiff upper lip. They should be able to bring up cases and still get their justice. I just want women to get their justice.
Well, we had hoped to speak to the new Director of Public Prosecutions about this question, but I'm afraid she withdrew last night. But the campaign for a change in the law is being supported by Women Against Rape. I spoke earlier this morning to Nicola Mann from WAR. There is no time limit on violence classified as actual or grievous bodily harm or rape. So why are they concerned about the law as it stands?
Well, we're concerned because so many domestic violence assaults are classed as common assault, which only has a 6-month time limit. And as the lady has just stated, that when you're in a domestic violence relationship, it's very difficult to leave somebody that you have an emotional attachment to. You may have children with them. You may financially be unable to leave. And it takes a long time to even accept that you've been a victim of domestic violence. A lot of women minimise things that happen to them initially because they can't quite believe that the person that they loved is doing this. Again, the person will often then show remorse and beg forgiveness and say they're sorry and it won't happen again. And things are okay for a couple of months and then the pattern starts again. So 6-month time limit on what's classed as a common assault in a domestic violence relationship is very, very wrong.
What are the problems, in your experience, with bringing historic cases of domestic violence to court?
Well, we find a lot of the time with historic cases, there can be evidence. As in this case, there were medical records from the hospital that showed what she had reported many years ago. But we're still finding that the police are not gathering the evidence. They're not looking for the evidence. There are records from doctors that aren't used. In some instances, there are witnesses, and witnesses aren't contacted. So although there might not be any physical evidence if it's a historic case, there is still evidence there that can support the victim who is reporting, and it's not being looked at and not being sent to the CPS.
Why do you think the police skills in this area have not improved as they have in other areas like sexual violence?
Well, we're not sure that it's improved in sexual violence either. But with domestic violence, we still find that there is a real culture of disbelief. There are still a lot of sexist and biased investigations that go on. The all-party parliamentary group inquiry into domestic violence recently heard evidence not just from survivors but from the IPCC, the police, Refuge, Women's Aid and a various number of organisations that support women, and over 90% of them said that women are still being denied access to justice when it comes to domestic violence because there is still such a poor police response. One victim said that when she reported her husband, the police attended the scene. They spoke to them both, and when they left, they said to the woman, "Don't make a habit of this." Now, this is a woman that's called the police for help because she's been attacked by her partner, and the police are coming and they're still not really seeing women as victims, and also the onus is on the woman. You know, it's almost like, well, what did you do to encourage this?
Now, we've seen the figures released today by the Crown Prosecution Service showing a significant rise in convictions of perpetrators of domestic violence. How much are things really improving?
Well, we find those figures very disingenuous because they don't reflect the conviction rate from the amount of reports of domestic violence each year. We know from the British Crime Survey that over 90% of domestic violence assaults go unreported because women don't feel they're going to be believed. But in 2013, there were 838,000 reports of domestic violence, and that resulted in a 6.5% conviction rate. The reporting has gone up by 11% of women reporting domestic violence to the police, but referrals for prosecution have gone down by 14%. So it's very difficult to listen to figures being released saying we're doing such a great job of gathering evidence, the conviction rate is the highest it's ever been. It really isn't from reporting, and we need to look at the issues as to why women aren't reporting.
Now, the definition of common assault is an incident that's transient and trifling. How appropriate a charge is it for any form of domestic violence?
It's not appropriate because, as the woman was saying earlier, when you're in a relationship with somebody and there's an emotional connection, being assaulted by somebody that you love has a much greater impact than it does if you're assaulted by a stranger. It has an impact on your family, it has an impact on your children. The impact for a woman being assaulted by a partner is far, far greater than any other assault. We've also seen an increase in domestic violence being classed as common assault instead of ABH or GBH, which, you know, are harsher charges and face stiffer penalties, and that's really wrong.
But why do you think that is?
We think it is still because there is this culture of disbelief in the police, this real sexist culture within the police force and within the criminal justice system. And prosecutors and lawyers are still using rape myths and domestic violence myths against women in court, which is so wrong.
How do you want to see the law changed?
Well, we don't think there should be a 6-month time limit on domestic violence. And we do believe that if a domestic violence assault is classed as common assault, there should be the aggravating factor of domestic violence. It's not right to think that women should be able to leave within 6 months of reporting domestic violence. There are a lot of reasons why they don't. Refuges are being cut. Over 200 women a day sometimes are being turned away from refuges because there aren't spaces. And with the introduction of benefit caps and the bedroom tax, women are having to stay in relationships with violent men because they financially can't afford to leave. So to expect them to be able to leave within 6 months or before 6 months and then make a complaint to the police where there is this whole culture of disbelief is unrealistic. And women are ending up staying in violent relationships and they're paying with their lives.
I was talking to Nicola Mann. Now, we did ask the Ministry of Justice to take part. They sent a statement. They say the government takes the issue of domestic violence very seriously and is committed to ensuring greater protection for victims of all forms of violence. We have revamped the Victims Code to ensure victims of the most serious crimes, including domestic and sexual violence, receive the highest level of support. This support will be there from the moment they report a crime to the end of the trial and beyond. And of course, if you need any help or support about how to deal with domestic violence, female or male, do follow the links on the Woman's Hour website. Now, still to come is